I came to my daughter's house for Christmas dinner, and I was the only one who didn't receive a gift under the tree. They weren't glad to see me there. I always believed Christmas was a season for mending hearts. No matter how many disagreements or misunderstandings had happened during the year, when December rolled around, I told myself that families drew closer. It was the magic of lights twinkling on rooftops, of children whispering secrets into Santa's ear, of church bells ringing in the cold night air. And so when my daughter invited me to spend Christmas at her house this year, my heart stirred with hope. I had been saving a little from my pension and the quiet income from my small writing work. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to make me feel like I could give generously. I set out into the winter air with a suitcase not only full of gifts but full of expectation. For the girls, my granddaughters, I had chosen dolls with soft faces and long hair, the kind they could braid and style for hours. I still remembered how my daughter, when she was little, used to dress up her dolls in scraps of cloth I sewed for her. She would sit on the floor, serious as a little mother, brushing the tangled hair with the patience only a child could muster. I thought maybe her girls would feel the same joy. For the boys, I bought toy trucks, sturdy little things made of metal, not flimsy plastic. I wanted them to feel weight in their hands, the way my brothers once did when they played in the dirt, racing toy cars under the shade of our oak tree. I could almost hear their laughter, see the dust rising in the golden afternoon sun. I hoped my grandsons would love them just the same. For my daughter, I had chosen a scarf. A soft wool scarf in a shade of blue I thought might match her eyes. She always cared about how she looked, even as a young girl. I remember her standing before the mirror, braiding her hair again and again until it fell just right over her shoulders. A mother notices these things, tucks them away like folded letters. For her husband, a handsome tie, burgundy with a faint pattern. Something classic but smart. He was a businessman, always dressed well when I saw him, and I thought he might appreciate something simple but elegant. I wrapped each gift carefully, tied each with ribbon. Not just presents but pieces of myself offered up with love. My suitcase smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine because I had also baked gingerbread men to bring along. It gave me comfort to think of my grandchildren biting into the cookies, sugar crystals clinging to their lips. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window of my little house, watching the snow fall soft and steady. The street lamp lit each flake like a tiny star, and I whispered a small prayer. Let this Christmas be warm. Let there be laughter, let me belong. In the morning I dressed in my best coat, a dark green one with brass buttons. I pinned on the brooch my late husband gave me our first Christmas together, a little silver snowflake. My shoes were polished, though the leather had softened with age. I wanted to arrive looking neat, respectable, worthy of being included. The taxi pulled up, its tires crunching on the snow. The driver, a kind man with salt and pepper hair, lifted my suitcase into the trunk. Going to see family? He asked. Yes, I said, smiling. My daughter's house. Christmas with the children. He nodded knowingly. That's the best place to be. I pressed my gloved hands together and tried to believe it. The drive was long, the roads lined with bare trees frosted with ice. Houses we passed glowed with strings of lights. Wreaths hung proudly on doors. I imagined each home filled with warmth, with stockings hung over fireplaces and children peeking around corners. I imagined that soon I too would step into such a home. When we turned into my daughter's neighborhood, I sat up straighter. The houses were large, brick and stone, with trimmed hedges and wide porches. Her home stood out with tall windows blazing with light, wreaths in perfect symmetry, and a Christmas tree shining in the front room. It looked like a picture in a magazine. The taxi stopped and I gathered my things. I checked the ribbons on the packages one last time. My fingers trembled, not from cold but from anticipation. I could hear laughter inside, the muffled hum of conversation. My heart lifted. The driver handed me my suitcase and gave me a cheerful wave before driving off. I stood there for a moment taking it all in, the wreath on the door, the warm glow through the curtains, the faint scent of roasted meat drifting on the air. This is it, I whispered to myself. Christmas with family. I rang the bell. My breath puffed out in little clouds as I waited. The moment my daughter opened that door, I expected her to pull me into an embrace, the way she used to when she came home from college, arms wrapped tight around my neck, her perfume clinging to my coat. But instead she only stepped aside and said flatly, "Oh, you're here." Her voice wasn't unkind exactly, but it wasn't warm either. Just polite, like a hostess greeting a guest she hadn't really invited. I smiled, though my heart faltered. I rolled my suitcase in, clutching the bag with the gingerbread cookies and the presents, careful not to wrinkle the wrapping paper. The house was alive with noise. Music floated from a speaker in the corner, something modern and loud. Laughter filled the air, sharp and constant, like champagne bubbling over. I looked around the living room and dining room, both packed with people, friends of my daughter and her husband, well-dressed and carrying glasses of wine. Not one of them I recognized. I stood there in the entryway, waiting for my daughter to introduce me. But she was already gliding away, heading back to her circle of friends, her hand brushing against her husband's arm as though she hadn't just left her mother standing with snow melting off her boots. I cleared my throat softly and stepped forward. A few of the guests glanced my way, then back to their conversations. No one smiled. No one said, "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Thompson." I might as well have been invisible. Finally, my son-in-law noticed me. He walked over, tall and polished in a crisp shirt, his tie loosened as if to say he was comfortable in his own home. He gave me a quick nod, not a hug. "You made it," he said, as if I were late to a meeting. Then he turned to someone behind him, already laughing at a joke I hadn't heard. I stood there for a long moment, my suitcase by my side, my coat still buttoned. It was a friend of theirs, a woman in a sparkling dress, who finally said, "Oh, you poor thing, let me take your coat." She slipped it from my shoulders and hung it neatly on the rack. Her kindness, though small, nearly undid me. I murmured a thank you, my throat tight. I carried my suitcase into the hallway and left it by the stairs. My gifts looked small and out of place against the gleaming banister and glittering decorations. The house itself was beautiful, garlands draped over the mantel, a tall tree heavy with ornaments, candles flickering on every surface. It looked like a magazine spread, polished and perfect. But something about it felt cold, as though the warmth was only for show. I moved quietly into the living room, choosing a chair near the corner. No one offered me a drink. No one asked me to join their conversation. I folded my hands in my lap and listened, smiling politely when someone's eyes flicked briefly in my direction. I watched my daughter flutter among her guests, her laugh light and practiced, her hand brushing her husband's sleeve, her children running past in new clothes. They didn't stop to greet me, not even when I tried to catch their eyes. I reminded myself they were excited, caught up in the energy of the party. It will be better tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, when it's just family, things will feel different. Still, I couldn't help remembering past Christmases, when my daughter was little, how she'd sit cross-legged by the fire, waiting for me to read The Night Before Christmas. She used to lean her head against my shoulder, her hair smelling of soap and sugar cookies. I had thought, foolishly perhaps, that those memories still meant something to her. After a while, I excused myself to the kitchen. I thought maybe I could help, maybe that would give me a place in the house. But when I stepped inside, I saw two women bustling at the counter, plating hors d'oeuvres and refilling trays. "Oh," one of them said, startled. "Can we help you with something?" I smiled. Just thought I might lend a hand. The woman hesitated, then smiled too brightly. "Everything's under control. You just relax." So I retreated back to my corner, feeling more like a stranger than ever. The evening wore on. Glasses clinked, toasts were made, jokes told and retold. I sat quietly, my hands folded over my knees, watching the children dash up and down the stairs, watching my daughter smile a smile I didn't recognize anymore. At one point, a guest leaned toward her and said, "What a beautiful home you have. Everything's perfect." My daughter beamed, her eyes shining. Perfect. That word again. Yes, everything was perfect. Everything but me. When the party finally began to thin out, I rose and gathered my suitcase. My daughter glanced at me, surprised. "Oh, you're still here? Well, there's a guest room upstairs, you can take that." Still here. The word stung more than I let show. I nodded, murmured good night, and carried my things up the stairs. The guest room was neat and spotless, a bed dressed in white linens, a single lamp glowing on the nightstand. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. They looked so small folded together like that. I told myself again that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow there would be stockings and gifts and laughter. Tomorrow my grandchildren would come running into my arms. Tomorrow my daughter would remember who I was. But that night, alone in that polished, perfect house, I felt like a ghost haunting a life that had once belonged to me. The first sound I heard Christmas morning was the thunder of small feet rushing down the hallway. I had only just begun to stir in the guest room, my body stiff from a night spent turning over too many thoughts. For a moment I smiled to myself. The children, my grandchildren, were excited. That was natural. I pulled on my robe, smoothed my hair with my palms, and followed their voices down the stairs. The living room glowed like a picture out of a holiday card. The tree twinkled, its branches heavy with glass ornaments, and beneath it sat a mountain of wrapped packages. Boxes of every shape and size, ribbons curling in bright colors, tags glinting under the lights. The children were already tearing into them, squeals of delight filling the air. I stood in the doorway watching them. My heart swelled, remembering when my own daughter was that age. She used to unwrap her gifts carefully, peeling the tape so as not to rip the paper, then folding it neatly beside her. "We can use it again next year," she'd say, serious as a little grown woman. That memory alone nearly brought tears to my eyes. I glanced around for my daughter. She and her husband were on the couch, mugs of coffee in their hands, smiling as the children shrieked over dolls, puzzles, trucks, and shiny new gadgets. Friends were there too, still lingering from the night before, their laughter mingling with the chaos of paper being ripped open. I stepped a little closer, waiting for someone to notice me. My suitcase still sat by the stairs, the gifts I had brought stacked neatly inside. I hadn't given them out yet, wanting to wait until the children had settled down. I thought perhaps we could all sit together, share gifts one by one. That's what Christmas morning had always meant to me. Giving and receiving, hand to hand, heart to heart. But no one called my name. No one said, "Mother, come sit with us." No one motioned for me to join the circle on the rug. I perched on the edge of a chair and tried to blend into the laughter. One by one, the children unwrapped bicycles, remote-controlled cars, shiny tablets that lit up with colors. Their faces glowed. Their voices rose high with excitement, each gift bigger than the last. Then I noticed something. The piles of torn paper grew around their feet. The stacks of toys and clothes spread across the room. But not a single package had my name written on it. I leaned forward slightly, scanning the tags. To Emma from Mommy and Daddy. To James from Santa. To Olivia from Uncle Mark and Aunt Sarah. Over and over, names and signatures, but never mine. Not once. I sat back slowly, my hands folded tightly in my lap, so tight the knuckles whitened. I told myself it was a mistake. Perhaps they had tucked something aside for later, waiting until the children had finished. Maybe my daughter had hidden a gift upstairs, to surprise me in her own way. But as the morning wore on, box after box was opened, ribbon after ribbon fell limp, and still nothing came to me. The children didn't notice. Why would they? They were too busy squealing, running to their parents for hugs, holding up each prize for admiration. I forced a smile, clapping softly when one of them unwrapped a dollhouse, laughing lightly when another showed off a shiny new bicycle helmet. But inside me a hollowness spread. Not even a pair of socks. Not even a scented candle from the dollar store. Nothing. When the last package was open, the children dove into their new toys, the room filled with the sound of batteries snapping into place and cardboard being torn into makeshift forts. My daughter leaned back against her husband, smiling as she sipped her coffee. Her friends chatted in little groups, some taking pictures, others comparing gifts they had exchanged the night before. No one looked my way. No one said, "Mother, here's something for you." I rose quietly, excused myself to the kitchen. No one stopped me. In the stillness there I opened my bag. My gifts waited neatly wrapped. The dolls, the toy trucks, the scarf, the tie. I touched each one gently, as if they were fragile. I had imagined their little hands tearing the paper, imagined my daughter's smile as she draped the scarf around her shoulders, imagined my son-in-law nodding with approval at the tie. I closed the suitcase. I wasn't ready to give them just yet. Not after what I had seen. I poured myself a small cup of coffee and stood at the window watching the snow fall. My reflection in the glass startled me. An older woman, tired around the eyes, standing in a kitchen that wasn't hers, holding a cup no one had offered her. I thought of the years behind me. The Christmas mornings when I had scraped every last dime to buy something for my daughter, even if it was small. The nights I had stayed up sewing clothes for her dolls, baking cookies when I couldn't afford candy, wrapping things in old newspapers because I hadn't the money for real paper. Back then she had looked at me with wonder, with gratitude. Now she didn't look at me at all. I sipped the coffee. It tasted bitter. When I returned to the living room, the mess of paper had already been gathered by one of the guests, stacked neatly into a trash bag. The children were lost in their new gadgets. My daughter caught my eye briefly, then turned away before I could say a word. I sat back in my corner, my hands empty, my heart heavier than ever. That night, after the excitement of presents had died down and the house grew quieter, I lingered in the guest room. My suitcase sat by the bed, still holding the gifts I had brought. I hadn't had the courage to give them out. Not after watching Christmas morning pass me by like a train I wasn't allowed to board. I thought perhaps there might still be a chance later. Maybe my daughter had simply forgotten in the rush of things. Maybe, when the guests left and the children had gone to bed, she would come to me with an embarrassed smile and something in her hand saying, "I almost forgot, Mother." That hope was a fragile candle inside me, flickering but not yet extinguished. It was near midnight when I heard voices in the hallway. The sound of laughter, hushed and careless, floated up the stairs. I slipped from the bed, moving quietly, and cracked the guest room door just a little. My daughter and her husband were walking toward the children's bedrooms, whispering. I don't know why I listened. Maybe because part of me wanted to hear something good, something that would reassure me that I still had a place in their world. Instead, what I heard sliced through me like a knife. "Don't pay her too much attention," my daughter said softly, her voice firm but dismissive. Her husband chuckled. "I know. She just lingers, gets in the way. The kids should focus on their new things. She'll be leaving soon enough." My breath caught. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. There was a pause, then her voice again, colder this time. "Honestly, I wish she wouldn't come for so long. Throws everything off. We have our own life now. She should understand that." The words seemed to echo down the hallway, bouncing against the walls, ringing in my ears. I closed the door softly, careful not to let it creak. My hands shook, but I pressed them together until the trembling stopped. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floorboards. My mind spun back through years of memories, the nights I had rocked her to sleep, the mornings I had packed her lunch, The winter days I had knitted her mittens so her hands wouldn't freeze. Had all of that become so small in her eyes that now I was nothing more than in the way? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe it was stress, the holiday chaos, too many people in the house. But then I remembered the tone in her voice. Firm. Cold. Certain. No, it wasn't stress. It was truth. And then the cruelest thought of all. She was speaking about me to her husband, the man I had welcomed into our family, the father of my grandchildren. Not only had she turned cold, but she had taught him to be cold toward me too. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened. For years I had believed that mothers always had a place in their children's hearts. Maybe not always at the center, but at least at the edges. That night I realized, my daughter had pushed me out of her circle entirely. The house was silent again, except for the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. I rose, opened my suitcase, and looked at the gifts I had packed. The dolls, the toy trucks, the scarf, the tie, all sitting there untouched. I ran my hand over the smooth wrapping paper, the ribbons tied carefully into bows. My love was wrapped into those packages, but it was love they didn't want. I closed the suitcase gently and sat back down. For the first time, I didn't pray for things to get better. I didn't tell myself that tomorrow would be different. I simply sat with the truth, heavy and immovable, pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. I thought of my grandchildren, so bright, so full of joy. They deserved my love, but they were learning from their parents to see me as unnecessary, a figure on the sidelines. It broke my heart to realize that the warmth between us might vanish before it ever had a chance to grow deep. The candle of hope inside me went out that night. What replaced it wasn't anger, not yet, but a hollow clarity. A knowing. I was not wanted here. Not in this house, not in their hearts. When I finally lay down, I stared at the ceiling for hours, the shadows shifting as the moonlight moved. Sleep never came. Only the echo of her words. She should understand. She's in the way. And dear, as I sit here now recalling it, I did understand. More than she thought I did. I rose before the sun the next morning. The house was still and hushed, the kind of silence that usually carries peace, but for me it carried only resolve. I dressed quietly, slipping into the same green coat I'd worn when I arrived, fastening the brass buttons one by one. Each click of the button felt like a final stitch, sealing something closed inside me. The suitcase sat waiting by the bed. I had left the gifts inside, dolls, trucks, scarf, ties still wrapped with neat bows. I stood over them for a moment, torn. Should I leave them behind for the children? A last gesture of love? Or should I take them with me? Carry them away as a reminder that my love had not been welcomed? In the end, I closed the suitcase gently. My gifts were mine to give, but I could not give them where they would be met with indifference. I lifted the handle and carried it toward the door. The hallway was dark, the only light spilling in from the window at the top of the stairs. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone. I passed the children's rooms, the faint sound of their breathing drifting through the cracked doors. My heart clenched. I wanted to slip inside, tuck the blankets around their shoulders, whisper "Merry Christmas" into their little ears. But I didn't. They were learning from their parents, and though I still loved them with every fiber of my being, I knew my presence was already being reshaped into something unwelcome. Downstairs, the remnants of the holiday were scattered across the living room. Empty glasses, crumpled paper, toys abandoned in a heap. The tree lights blinked lazily, casting long shadows across the floor. I paused there, suitcase in hand, looking at the glow one last time. This was supposed to be my Christmas too. Instead, it had become the moment I finally understood the truth. I slipped on my gloves, pulled my scarf around my neck, and opened the front door. The cold morning air hit my face, sharp and bracing. It woke me fully, like stepping into another world. Behind me, the house remained silent, unaware or uncaring that I was leaving. The snow crunched beneath my shoes as I walked down the driveway. I hadn't called for a taxi yet, but I knew I'd find my way. I always had. The crisp winter air burned in my lungs, but with each breath I felt lighter, as though I was shedding a weight I'd carried too long. At the end of the street I paused. The neighborhood was still, the houses lined up in their perfect rows. Wreaths still hanging, lights still twinkling. Families inside were probably still sleeping, or perhaps beginning to stir with the joy of another day together. I thought of the years I had given to building my own family, the sacrifices made, the nights spent worrying, the mornings spent working hard so my daughter could have more than I did. I had poured myself into her life like water into dry soil. And yet here I stood, unwanted. A car passed slowly, tires crunching on the snow. The driver glanced at me, an older woman with a suitcase standing at the corner in the cold. I must have looked like someone waiting to be picked up. And in a way I was waiting for life itself to pick me up and take me somewhere new. I pulled out my phone and called for a taxi. The operator's voice was brisk, efficient, but even that small bit of human connection steadied me. I gave the address and then I waited, standing in the cold with my suitcase at my side. When the cab finally pulled up, the driver rolled down his window. "Need a ride, ma'am?" "Yes," I said softly. "I do." He got out, lifted my suitcase into the trunk, and opened the door for me. His kindness was simple, unremarkable, yet it nearly undid me. I slid into the back seat, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time. The tall windows glowed faintly, the Christmas tree visible through the glass. But there was no warmth for me inside, no welcome waiting. Just a cold perfection that had no room for a mother's presence. I turned my gaze forward. The road stretched out before me, quiet and long, lined with snow-laden trees. The driver hummed softly to himself, some old tune playing low on the radio. I stared out the window, my reflection blurred against the frost. On that ride home I made myself a promise. I would never again beg for a place in a family that had already shown me the door. I had lived too long, worked too hard, and loved too deeply to spend the rest of my days waiting in corners for scraps of affection. No, my life wasn't over, not by a long shot. Somewhere inside me something strong stirred. Something that had been quiet for too many years. A voice that said, "You are still here. You still matter." By the time the cab turned onto the familiar streets near my home, my decision had already been made. I wasn't going to fade away quietly. I was going to begin again. When the cab dropped me off at my little house, the sun was only just beginning to rise. Pale light stretched across the snow, turning the world silver. My old place sat there waiting for me, small, plain, familiar. Once its quietness had comforted me. But that morning, as I stood outside with my suitcase in hand, I felt something shift. This house wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was only a stop on the way to something greater. I carried my things inside, set down the suitcase in the hallway, and hung my coat neatly on its hook. For a long moment I stood there, listening to the stillness. No laughter, no voices, no one telling me I was in the way. Just silence. And instead of loneliness, I felt relief. I put on the kettle, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and thought about what came next. For the first time in years, I didn't feel bound to anyone else's expectations. My daughter had freed me, though not in the way she intended. Her words, "She should understand. She's in the way," had lit a fire under me. And now I understood something clearly. I was not going to live out the rest of my days in shadows. By noon I had made my decision. I picked up the phone and called a realtor. "I want to sell my house," I said plainly. "And I want to buy something bigger. Something beautiful." The woman on the other end hesitated. "Do you have an idea of what you're looking for?" "Yes," I said. "A place with light. A place that feels alive." That very week I began touring houses. Grand houses with tall windows and sweeping staircases. Modern ones with gleaming kitchens and polished floors. At first, I felt shy stepping into such spaces, as though I didn't belong. But then I remembered I had earned my way here. 10 years of work, 10 years of writing, 10 years of tucking away each royalty check. My words had carried me farther than I had realized. And then I found it. A sprawling brick home at the edge of town, surrounded by trees, its porch wide and welcoming. The moment I walked inside, the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to reach out and embrace me. I could see myself here. I could see joy here. "I'll take it," I told the realtor without hesitation. The next day I went to a car dealership. My old sedan had served me faithfully, but it was tired, rattling more with each passing year. This time I wanted something bold. I walked down the rows of shiny vehicles until I found her. A sleek black car with leather seats and a polished finish that gleamed like a mirror. I ran my hand along the hood and felt a thrill I hadn't known in years. "This one," I said firmly. The salesman grinned. "Excellent choice." But I wasn't finished. My back wasn't what it used to be, and I was weary of long drives. So I hired a driver, a dignified man named Mr. Harris, with kind eyes and a steady presence. When he opened the car door for me that first day, I almost laughed aloud. Imagine me, a grandmother who once pinched pennies just to buy bread, now stepping into the backseat of her own car with a driver at the wheel. When I moved into my new house, I walked from room to room in awe. The walls were mine, the floors mine, every corner holding the promise of new beginnings. I unpacked my books first, lining them neatly on the shelves in the library. Each spine reminded me of the work I had poured into my writing, the countless hours spent at the kitchen table with a pen in hand, the nights when I wondered if anyone would ever read my words. And now here I was, proof that those words had built me a new life. That evening I took a picture, me standing in front of my new house, my car parked proudly in the driveway. Mr. Harris snapped it for me, and I posted it on social media with a simple caption. "A new chapter begins." It didn't take long for the news to spread. Word travels fast in families, faster still when money or comfort is involved. Within days of posting that picture of me in front of my new house with my shiny car, my phone, which had sat quiet for so long, became a thing that hardly stopped ringing. The first call was from my daughter. I could hear the cheer in her voice, too sweet, too polished. "Mother," she said brightly, "I saw your post. My goodness, the house is beautiful. Why didn't you tell us you were moving?" I held the phone against my ear, staring out the wide window of my new living room. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors, making the room glow. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I said evenly. She laughed, that practiced little laugh of hers. "Of course I'm interested. You're my mother. We're all so happy for you. The children can't wait to see the new place." The children. I pictured their eager faces, but then another picture pressed into my mind. Christmas morning, their hands tearing into shiny packages, their eyes never glancing toward me. "I'll think about it," I said softly and changed the subject. After that, the calls came daily. Sometimes it was my daughter, sometimes her husband, sometimes even one of the children on speakerphone, their voices high and rehearsed. "Grandma, we love you. Can we come visit soon?" I listened, I answered politely, but a part of me sat apart, remembering. Their sudden affection was like a coat put on for company, warm on the outside, but not real enough to last. Then came the visits. One afternoon my daughter arrived at the door, a bouquet of flowers in her hand. She had never brought me flowers before, not once, not even on my birthday. "Mother," she said, stepping into the foyer, her eyes darting around the spacious hall. "This house is, well, it's perfect." She set the flowers on the table, kissed my cheek, and began asking questions. How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how large the kitchen was. I answered politely, though I could see the flicker in her eyes, half admiration, half calculation. The grandchildren came too, running through the house with wide eyes, exclaiming over the size of the rooms, the glossy finish on the banisters, the garden out back. "Grandma," one of them said breathlessly, "this is like a castle." I smiled, ruffled their hair, and showed them the library, the one room that truly felt like me. Rows of books lined the shelves, the air smelling faintly of old paper and ink. "This," I told them, "is where I spend most of my time." They nodded politely but quickly lost interest, drifting toward the new car in the driveway, tugging at my sleeve to ask for a ride. Mr. Harris, my driver, obliged, taking them around the block while they squealed with delight. I stood at the window watching. Their joy was real, but it was tied not to me, but to the shine of the car, the novelty of the ride. Later, my daughter sat across from me at the dining table, her fingers tapping against the wood. "Mother," she said, smiling just a little too wide, "I'm so glad you're comfortable now. It's good to see you thriving. You must feel so proud." I sipped my tea slowly. "Yes," I said, "I do feel proud. I've worked hard for this." Her eyes flickered at that, a quick shadow passing across her smile. She leaned forward. "And how exactly did you manage all this? Selling your old house wouldn't have covered such a place. Not even close." I looked at her, steady and calm. "I've been working quietly for a long time," I said. 10 years, in fact." She tilted her head, curiosity and suspicion mingling in her gaze. "Doing what, exactly?" But I only smiled and changed the subject. It was only a matter of time before the question came outright. My daughter had asked gently at first, her husband a little more bluntly. The children, in their curious way, danced around it with wide eyes and innocent voices. "Grandma, how did you buy such a big house? How did you get that car?" First, I had dodged their questions. A smile here, a change of subject there. Part of me enjoyed watching them squirm, trying to piece together the puzzle of my sudden transformation. But the truth was simple, and sooner or later it had to be told. The moment came one evening at dinner. They had all come over, my daughter, her husband, the children, all gathered around my new dining table, polished and gleaming beneath the chandelier. I had cooked for them, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to remind myself that giving freely was still in my nature. Old habits of love don't disappear overnight, no matter how bruised the heart. Halfway through the meal, my son-in-law leaned forward, his fork resting on his plate. "Mother," he said carefully, "we've all been wondering, how exactly did you afford all this? The house, the car, even a driver. It's not exactly what one can manage on a pension." The children fell quiet, their eyes fixed on me. Even my daughter, who tried to look casual as she sipped her wine, tilted her head ever so slightly, waiting. I set down my napkin and folded my hands in my lap. For a moment I let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing against them. Then I smiled. "I'll tell you," I said. Their eyes widened. "For the past 10 years, I've been writing. Not just letters, not just journals, books. Stories drawn from the life I've lived, the people I've met, the things I've felt. Late at night at the kitchen table while the world slept, I wrote. Page after page, word after word. And I didn't just write them. I published them. E-books, as they call them now." I could see the flicker of recognition in their faces. They had heard of such things, but they had never imagined their mother or grandmother could be behind them. "At first," I continued, "there wasn't much. A few dollars here, a few there. Enough to buy groceries, perhaps a new coat once in a while. But over time, people began to read. And then more people. My words found their way into homes I'd never seen, into hands I'd never shaken. Slowly, quietly, the money grew. One book became 3, 3 became 10. And now," I paused, watching their eyes grow larger. "Those books have earned me more than $15 million. The fork in my son-in-law's hand clattered against his plate. My daughter gasped softly, then tried to cover it with a cough. The children gaped, their mouths open as though I had just told them I could fly. 15 million? My daughter repeated, her voice thin. Yes, I said simply. Every penny earned with my own 2 hands, every word written by me. It's been my work, my secret, my joy for 10 years. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. They didn't know what to say, how to place me now in their picture of the world. The grandmother they had dismissed as in the way had become something else entirely, a woman of means, of independence, of success. Finally my daughter laughed, though it rang hollow. Mother, why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have celebrated with you. I met her eyes steady. Because you didn't ask. You never cared to know what filled my days, what I worked on late at night. To you I was just there. And at Christmas, when you had the chance to show me love, you didn't. You left me sitting with empty hands. Her face flushed. She looked down at her plate. The children, though, leaned closer. Grandma, one of them whispered, "You're famous." I smiled gently. Not famous like the people on television. But yes, in a way. My words travel farther than I do. People write to me, telling me my books gave them comfort, or strength, or even laughter when they needed it most. That's better than fame to me. The youngest piped up. Can we read them too? I reached across the table and squeezed his little hand. One day, perhaps. But remember, what makes them special isn't the money they brought. It's that they came from love, from living, from never giving up. As the evening wore on, my family tried to recover their composure. They asked more questions, but I could see the glint in their eyes, greed, calculation, the wheels already turning. $15 million was not something they could hear about without hungering after it. I poured myself another cup of tea and sat back, calm and certain. The truth was out now, and I was no longer invisible. But I knew, deep in my bones, that attention born from dollar signs is no attention at all. Still, I had spoken my truth. The secret was revealed. And I was ready for whatever storm would follow. It didn't take long after that dinner for the masks to slip. At first they called often, dropping by more than they ever had before. But their questions turned sharper. Their curiosity less about me and more about numbers. How many books? How much each month? Where was it all kept? I answered politely but vaguely. Some truths don't need to be shared. Still, I saw the hunger growing in their eyes, and I knew this wouldn't end with polite questions over tea. And I was right. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived at my door, stamped with the seal of the county court. I opened it at my desk, my hand steady, though my heart quickened. Inside were the papers. A lawsuit. My own daughter and her husband were taking me to court. They claimed, in black and white, that they had contributed to my books. That the stories I wrote were built from family experiences, their experiences, and that therefore the profits belonged not to me alone but to all of them. They argued that they had been co-authors in spirit, that I had exploited their lives for profit without crediting them. I sat back in my chair, the papers trembling in my hands. My own blood. My daughter, the child I had rocked to sleep, was now trying to strip from me the work of my hands, the labor of my nights, the fruits of 10 long years. I felt sorrow, yes, but not surprise. Christmas had shown me the truth already. Now it was only written in ink. The weeks that followed were filled with lawyers and court dates. My attorney, a calm, kind man named Mr. Green, assured me, "You've nothing to fear. Their claims won't hold. But you must be ready, it will hurt." And it did. The courtroom was cold, paneled in wood, the air filled with whispers. My daughter sat across from me, her husband at her side. She wouldn't meet my eyes at first. When she did, her gaze was hard, unfamiliar, as though I were no longer her mother but an obstacle. They spoke of my books, quoting passages, pointing out similarities to family events. "See," her lawyer said, She drew from them from their shared lives. Without them, there would be no stories. She owes them credit. She owes them wealth. I sat silently, my hands folded, listening to their words cut away at the years we had once shared. They twisted memories into evidence, claiming moments that belonged to no one but me. When my turn came, I rose slowly. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. Yes, I wrote about life, about family, about sorrow and joy. But every writer does. What you see in those pages is my heart, my hands, my sleepless nights. These stories were built not from their work, but from mine. They never sat at the table at 2 a.m. with a pen and a blank page. They never fought with words until the right ones came. That labor is mine and mine alone. Mr. Green presented the evidence. Dated drafts on my old computer, handwritten notes in my journals, contracts with publishers, bank statements of royalties paid directly to me. Letters from readers around the world, thanking me for the comfort my words had given them. I watched my daughter's lawyer shuffle the papers, his confidence faltering. My daughter shifted in her chair, her husband scowling beside her. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. The evidence is clear. These works belong solely to the defendant. The plaintiff's claims are unfounded. I exhaled, relief flooding through me, though my heart was heavy. I had won, yes, but at what cost? As the gavel fell, my daughter's eyes finally met mine. For just a moment I thought I saw something flicker there, regret, perhaps, or shame. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the same cold distance I had seen on Christmas night. Outside the courtroom, reporters hovered, cameras flashing, voices calling questions. I answered none. I slipped quietly into Mr. Green's car and let the city roll by outside the window. It was done. My name, my work, my truth were safe. But so too was another truth. My family had betrayed me, not once but twice. First with silence and coldness. Now with greed. As I sat in that car, I felt something inside me close for good. Not bitter, not angry, simply finished. A door that would not open again. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. After the trial, I returned to my house with a strange calmness. The storm had passed, but it had left the landscape of my life forever changed. Family ties, I realized, can wither when watered only with greed. But words endure. I sat at my desk that evening, pen in hand, and began to write again. Not about lawsuits, not about betrayal, but about resilience. About the way a woman can lose nearly everything she thought mattered and still stand tall. Still create beauty from sorrow. The world saw me now not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as a writer. My books sold more than ever. Not because of the court drama, but because readers felt the truth in my words. They wrote to me still, letters arriving by the dozens. You gave me hope. You made me feel less alone. Those voices mattered more to me than any inheritance squabble ever could. And speaking of inheritance, I made a decision, firm and final. All that I had built, all that money, would not be passed down to those who had tried to take it from me. Instead, I created a foundation, one dedicated to children without homes and elders forgotten in their later years. Those who, like me once, had sat with empty hands and lonely hearts. When I announced it, the reactions were swift. My daughter called, furious. My grandchildren pleaded, confused. But my answer was simple. Love is not proven in a courtroom. It is proven in kindness. And kindness I will give to those who need it most. The lawsuit stopped after that. They knew they could not win. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence I had already learned to live with. In the years that followed, I flourished. I wrote more books, each one carrying pieces of me into the world. I traveled to give readings, meeting strangers who hugged me as though I were family. My driver, Mr. Harris, became a trusted companion, steady and dependable. My house, once echoing, filled with the voices of readers, colleagues, and friends. And most of all, I found peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on others' approval, but the kind that blooms quietly in the heart when you finally know your worth. When I look back now, Christmas no longer hurts. It stands simply as the night when I opened my eyes, when I understood that being unwanted by some does not mean you are without value. In truth, it was the beginning of the rest of my life. So I sit at my desk, pen in hand, the pages before me bright with possibility. I am no longer just a grandmother pushed aside. I am a woman who turned pain into stories, and stories into strength. And I am at peace,